What happens when a king trades his destiny for a crown? Alpha King. Karl Eriskan had everything: power, wealth, an empire that stretched across the frozen northern kingdoms. He was the strongest wolf in the realm, feared by enemies and revered by allies. But when the moon goddess blessed him with a fated mate, a common healer named Delilah Johnson from the humble Frost River pack, he made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He rejected her. Not quietly, not privately. He stood before the entire realm during the Winter Moon Festival and branded her unworthy. He called her a failure. He had her stripped of her Luna robes and cast into the cursed wastelands, a frozen hell beyond the kingdom's borders where exiled wolves were sent to die. He chose political power over the moon goddess's blessing. He married Lord Thornfield's daughter, Lady Evangeline, securing a military alliance that made him the richest and most powerful Alpha King in history. He built an empire on that choice. But he made one fatal mistake. He didn't know who she really was. He didn't know what ancient power lived dormant in her blood. He didn't know that the common healer he threw away like trash was the last living descendant of the Silverblood dynasty, the original white lichen rulers who were hunted to extinction 300 years ago. And when the last white lichen rises from the ashes of betrayal, when she returns with eyes that burn silver white and a divine wolf at her side, kingdoms don't just fall, they burn. Now, before we dive into this story of revenge, power, and the most epic return you've ever heard, let me ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever been thrown away by someone who should have valued you? Because that's what this story is really about. It's about a woman who was supposed to die in the cold, but instead became the queen of winter itself. If you love stories where the rejected rise up and reclaim everything, you're going to want to stick around for this one. And hey, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because we're about to witness one of the most satisfying power reversals in Wolf Kingdom history. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when Delilah walks back into that throne room. The Black Raven arrived at dawn. Delilah stood alone in her war room, a circular chamber carved from black obsidian at the heart of her fortress. Maps covered the stone table before her, detailed sketches of kingdoms, territories, and supply routes. She'd been planning something for months now, carefully, methodically. The cursed wastelands had been her prison 5 years ago. Now they were her stronghold. The fortress itself was a marvel, a structure that shouldn't exist in this frozen hell. Carved from the mountain's dark stone, it rose like a black fang against the white landscape. Ice and snow surrounded it for miles in every direction, but within its walls, fires burned warm. Wolves patrolled the Hakit's perimeter, her wolves, exiles, and outcasts who had pledged their loyalty to her cause. She heard the raven before she saw it. The harsh caw echoed through the narrow window. When she looked up, the bird was there on the stone sill, larger than normal, its feathers dark as midnight. Something crimson was tied to its leg. Delilah approached slowly. Ravens were messengers in the old tradition, used when secrecy mattered. This one bore a scroll, sealed with wax. Even from across the room, she could see the emblem pressed into the red seal, the iron crown, Karl's symbol. Her hand trembled slightly as she untied the scroll, not from fear, from rage barely contained. The parchment was expensive, thick cream-colored stock that smelled of pine, smoke, and something else. Power, arrogance. The scent of Karl's kingdom, a smell she would never forget. The scroll unfurled in her hands. The address made her jaw clench. Delilah of the Wastelands. Not Alpha Delilah, a title she'd earned leading her exiled pack. Not even her family name Johnson. Just Delilah of the Wastelands, as if her entire identity was defined by the place he'd sent her to die. The invitation itself was worse. You are hereby invited to attend the 5th reign anniversary celebration of His Majesty, Alpha King Karl Eriskon, Lord of the Iron Crown Kingdom, Protector of the Northern Territories, and Blessed Consort of Queen Evangeline Thornfield. Your presence is requested to witness the glory and prosperity of the true royal line. The celebration will be held at the Grand Hall on the night of the winter moon. Attendance is commanded by royal decree. Commanded, not requested, commanded. And at the bottom, in smaller script that she almost missed, a personal message that made her blood run cold. I know you survived, Delilah. Come and see what a real kingdom looks like. Come and see what you could never build. The scroll crumpled in her fist. Her breath came faster, harder. Anger, white-hot and pure, flooded through her veins. He knew she was alive. He'd known, probably for years, and he'd done nothing. No attempt to reconcile, no acknowledgement of the broken bond, nothing. And now this, an invitation designed to mock her, to prove that he'd moved on, that he'd thrived while she suffered. As the rage built, something else happened. Her eyes began to change. It started as a flicker, brown shifting to something lighter, brighter. Then the transformation accelerated. Her irises blazed silver white, the unmistakable mark of lichen royalty, a color that hadn't been seen in the wolf kingdoms for 3 centuries. The temperature in the room plummeted. Her breath misted in the suddenly frigid air. Frost spread across the stone floor from where she stood, delicate patterns of ice creeping outward like frozen lightning. That's when he entered. The massive white wolf padded through the doorway, his presence filling the room despite his silent approach. Fenrir. He was enormous, easily twice the size of a normal wolf, with fur as white as fresh snow that seemed to glow with an ethereal inner light. His eyes were the same silver white as hers, ancient and knowing. He wasn't just her companion, he was her guardian, sent by the moon goddess herself when Delilah's dormant bloodline had awakened 5 years ago in this very wasteland. Fenrir was proof of what she was, of the power that ran through her veins. White lichens were blessed by the goddess with divine protectors, and Fenrir could only manifest when a true silver blood heir lived. He growled low, sensing her fury, and moved to her side. When he pressed against her leg, she felt the familiar surge of connection, of power shared between them. "He invited us," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. "After everything he did, after throwing us away like garbage, he invites us to his celebration, to mock us." Fenrir's growl deepened, vibrating through the stone floor. Delilah's hand tightened on the scroll until her knuckles went white. The memories she'd fought so hard to bury came flooding back, vivid and sharp as broken glass. She closed her eyes, and the past swallowed her whole. 5 years ago, the Winter Moon Festival. The grand hall of the Iron Crown Keep had been magnificent that night, decorated for the kingdom's most sacred celebration. Thousands of candles cast golden light across marble floors. Silk banners in Karl's colors, crimson and gold, hung from the vaulted ceiling. The room was packed with wolves from every corner of the realm. Every alpha, every beta, every noble house of importance had come to witness the festival and honor their king. Delilah had stood at the front, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. She was 20 years old, young for a Luna, but so deeply in love she thought she might burst from it. She wore simple robes of pale blue, elegant but not ostentatious, appropriate for a Luna of common birth. Her dark hair had been braided with winter flowers, a tradition for mated pairs during the festival. She and Karl had been bonded for 6 months. 6 months of what she'd believed was genuine happiness. The mate bond was strong, powerful, the kind of connection that only came when the moon goddess herself chose your perfect match. Karl had been attentive, charming, and passionate. He'd told her he loved her. She'd believed him. But that night, something was different. Karl stood on the raised dais beside his throne, but he wasn't alone. Lord Marcus Thornfield, the wealthiest and most powerful warlord in the realm, stood at his right hand. Thornfield controlled the Silver Mountain territories, lands rich with iron ore and gold, and commanded an army of 10,000 warriors. Beside Thornfield stood his daughter, Lady Evangeline, a woman of cold beauty with pale skin and calculating eyes. Delilah had felt the first trickle of unease when she saw them standing so close to Carl, positioned where she should have been. When Carl began to speak, his voice was different, cold, detached. Nothing like the warm tone he'd used with her in private. "The Winter Moon Festival celebrates strength," Carl announced, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "It celebrates the bonds that make us powerful, the alliances that secure our future, the choices that define our legacy." Delilah smiled nervously, waiting for him to call her forward, to present her to the kingdom as his Luna. Instead, his next words shattered her world. "Which is why I must address a mistake I made 6 months ago." The hall went deadly quiet. "I accepted a mate bond with Delilah Johnson, a common-born healer from a minor pack." Carl's gaze swept over her, and there was nothing in his eyes. No love, no warmth, nothing. "I believed at the time that the moon goddess's choice was absolute, but I have learned that strength requires sacrifice. A king cannot afford to be weakened by sentimentality." Delilah's legs went numb. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. "Delilah Johnson is unworthy to stand beside a king," Carl declared, his voice ringing with finality. "She brings no strength to this kingdom, no alliance, no value. She is a liability I can no longer afford." The crowd murmured. Some looked shocked. Others looked satisfied, as if they'd been waiting for this. "No," Delilah whispered, the word barely escaping her lips. "Carl, no, please." He didn't look at her. He looked at Lord Thornfield, then at Lady Evangeline, and something passed between them, an understanding, a deal already made. "Therefore, by my authority as Alpha King of the Iron Crown, I, Carl Ereskine, formally reject you, Delilah Johnson, as my mate, as my Luna, and as a member of this kingdom." The words hit her like a physical blow. The mate bond, that beautiful, powerful connection between them, didn't just break, it shattered. The pain was indescribable, a tearing sensation in her chest and soul, as if something vital was being ripped out of her body. She screamed, couldn't help it, and collapsed to her knees. The court watched. No one moved to help her. "Let her be cast into the cursed wastelands," Carl continued, his voice devoid of mercy, "where failures belong. If she is ever seen within the borders of the Iron Crown Kingdom again, she is to be killed on sight." Guards appeared. Strong hands grabbed her arms, hauling her to her feet even as she sobbed and fought. The pain of the severed bond was overwhelming, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. "Carl, please," she cried out, reaching for him. "I love you. We're mates. The goddess chose us." He finally looked at her then, and the disgust in his eyes broke whatever remained of her heart. "The goddess made a mistake," he said coldly. "I'm correcting it." As the guards dragged her toward the doors, she saw Lady Evangeline step forward and take Carl's hand. She saw the smirk on the woman's face, the triumph in Lord Thornfield's eyes. She saw the entire court watch her humiliation with pity, scorn, or indifference. They stripped her of her Luna robes right there in the corridor, leaving her in nothing but a thin shift. Then they threw her into a wagon, drove her to the border, and cast her out into the snow. The cursed wastelands lived up to their name. It was deep winter, and the temperature was lethal. Delilah stumbled through the snow, her feet going numb, her body shaking violently. The pain of the severed bond was a constant agony in her chest, a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. She didn't know how long she walked. Hours? Days? Time lost meaning in the endless white expanse. Eventually, she couldn't walk anymore. She collapsed face first into the snow, her body shutting down from cold and trauma. This was it. This was where she would die, rejected, broken, alone. But as the darkness closed in, something inside her refused to accept that ending. Rage. Pure, burning rage ignited in her chest. She screamed into the frozen wasteland, screamed her heartbreak and fury and grief. The sound echoed off distant mountains, raw and primal, and something answered. Her scream became a howl. Her body erupted in white light so bright it turned night into day. Pain tore through her, but it was different from the bond breaking. This was power awakening, ancient blood recognizing itself, dormant genes activating after generations of silence. She felt her bones reshaping, her body changing. The shift was agonizing but inevitable. When it finished, she was no longer human. She was wolf, but not like any wolf she'd ever seen. She was massive, 3 times the size of a normal shifter, with fur as white as the snow around her that glowed with supernatural radiance. She looked at her reflection in a frozen lake and saw silver-white eyes staring back. Through the swirling snow, another shape appeared, another white wolf, even larger than her transformed self, with ancient wisdom in his gaze. He approached without fear, bowing his great head. And then she heard it, a voice, neither male nor female, resonating through her mind and the very air around her. "You are silver blood. You are the last. Rise, daughter of the moon, and reclaim what was stolen." The voice of the moon goddess herself. In that moment, Delilah understood. She wasn't just a common wolf, she was the last living descendant of the White Lichen dynasty, the original royal bloodline that had ruled all wolf kingdoms before they were betrayed and hunted to extinction 300 years ago. The power in her blood, dormant until her moment of greatest despair, had finally awakened. And the wolf before her was Fenrir, her divine guardian, proof of her birthright. Delilah gasped, her eyes snapping open, the memory releasing her. She was back in her war room, 5 years older, infinitely stronger, and burning with purpose. She walked to the balcony, Fenrir padding beside her. Below, in the fortress courtyard, her army assembled. Hundreds of wolves, all exiles and outcasts who had found their way to her over the years. Rogues who'd been cast out unjustly, warriors who'd questioned Karl's tyranny, healers who'd helped the wrong people, scouts who'd stolen food for starving packs. They were her people now. At the front stood her 3 commanders. Commander Rowan, a grizzled veteran with scars crossing his face, exiled for speaking truth to power. Healer Mira, barely 22 with gentle eyes and fierce loyalty, cast out for helping refugees. Scout Tobias, lean and sharp-eyed, exiled for feeding his starving pack. They looked up at her, waiting. Delilah raised the scroll high. Her voice rang out across the courtyard, amplified by the alpha command in her blood. "The false king celebrates his reign built on betrayal," she called out. "He sits on a throne stolen from my bloodline. He married his warlord's daughter and called it strength. He mocks us with this invitation, proof that he knows we survived but doesn't fear us." The crowd growled, a rumbling that shook the stone walls. "It's time he learns that some wolves don't die in the cold," Delilah continued, her silver-white eyes blazing. "Some wolves are forged by it, tempered by it, made stronger by it." She crushed the scroll in her fist. "We march at dawn. Not as exiles, not as outcasts, but as the army of the last White Lichen. We're taking back what belongs to the Silverblood dynasty. We're taking back the throne that was stolen from my ancestors 300 years ago. And we're going to show every kingdom in this realm what happens when you betray the moon goddess's chosen." The army roared their approval, the sound echoing across the frozen wasteland. "Prepare yourselves," Delilah commanded. Tomorrow we return to the Iron Crown Kingdom. Tomorrow Karl Eriskan faces the consequence of his choice. Dawn broke over the cursed wastelands, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. Delilah emerged from her fortress dressed for war and royalty both. White fur draped over winter armor made of leather and steel, designed for movement and protection. A crown of ice and silver sat on her head, ancient lichen symbols etched into the metal. Her dark hair flowed loose, and her silver-white eyes glowed with supernatural power. Fenrir walked beside her, massive and magnificent, his white fur catching the morning light. Behind her, her army fell into formation, hundreds of wolves, all loyal, all ready. They carried the banner of the Silverblood dynasty, a silver wolf on a white field, a symbol that hadn't flown in 3 centuries. Delilah paused at the gate, looking back at the fortress that had been her prison and her salvation. Then she turned toward the south, toward the Iron Crown Kingdom, toward the throne that was her birthright. Karl Eriskan wanted to see what became of the mate he threw away, she said softly, though her voice carried to every wolf present. He's about to find out, and it will be the last mistake he ever makes. She began to walk, Fenrir at her side, her army following in, perfect formation. The last white lichen was coming home. In the grand hall of the Iron Crown Keep, hundreds of miles away, Alpha King Karl Eriskan sat slumped on his throne. He looked nothing like the powerful king from 5 years ago. His face was gaunt, his skin gray-tinged, his once bright amber eyes now dull and hollow. He was dying, though no one dared say it aloud. Bond sickness, the curse that befell any wolf who rejected their fated mate without mutual consent. It was eating him alive from the inside out. A messenger burst through the doors, breathing hard, his face pale with fear. "Your Majesty," the messenger gasped, bowing quickly. "Urgent news from the northern border." Karl barely lifted his head. "Speak." "There's an army approaching, sire, from the cursed wastelands. They'll reach the capital within 2 days." Karl frowned. "An army? From the wastelands? Impossible. Nothing survives there." "They carry a banner, Your Majesty." The messenger's voice shook. "A banner we thought was lost to history, the silver wolf of the Silverblood dynasty." The throne room went deathly silent. Karl sat up straight for the first time in months, his eyes wide. "What did you say?" "The Silverblood banner, sire, the white lichen symbol, and at the head of the army." The messenger swallowed hard. "They say a woman walks with silver-white eyes and a white wolf the size of a bear at her side. They say she commands the exiles. They say she's coming to your celebration." Karl's face went white as death, because he knew exactly who that was. And for the first time in 5 years, Alpha King Karl Eriskan felt something he'd forgotten existed: fear. An army marches through frozen mountains. At its head walks a woman who was supposed to die 5 years ago. But death doesn't come for those blessed by the moon goddess. It kneels before them. The cursed wastelands were beautiful in their brutality. Delilah's army moved through mountain passes where frozen waterfalls hung suspended like crystal sculptures. Their flow stopped mid-cascade by the relentless cold. Ice caverns carved into cliff faces glittered with blue light. The wind howled constantly, a mournful sound that would drive most wolves to madness. But these weren't most wolves. These were survivors. Delilah led from the front, Fenrir at her side, setting a pace that was swift but sustainable. Every few hours she called for brief rests, moving through the ranks to check on her wolves. She knew most by name now. She asked about injuries, about supplies, about morale. This wasn't the desperate, broken girl who'd stumbled through this wasteland 5 years ago. This was an alpha who understood that an army's strength came from its unity. Commander Rowan walked beside her during one such check. "The younger ones are struggling with the altitude," he reported, his grizzled voice steady. "But they're keeping pace. No one wants to be the weak link. Reduce the pace slightly after the next rest. Delilah ordered. We'll still reach the capital in 2 days. Better to arrive with a strong army than an exhausted one. Rowan nodded approvingly. You've learned well. She had. The first year in the wastelands had nearly killed her a dozen times over. She remembered those early days with painful clarity. After her transformation, after Fenrir's appearance, she'd still been alone, confused, terrified of the power coursing through her veins. She'd had to learn everything from scratch: how to hunt in wolf form, how to find shelter, how to control the lichen power that threatened to consume her. The first time she'd tried to shift back to human form, it had taken 3 agonizing hours. The first time she'd hunted, she'd missed her prey 5 times before starvation forced her to succeed. The first winter she'd thought would be her last, but she'd survived. And with each challenge overcome, she'd grown stronger. Fenrir ranged ahead now, his supernatural senses detecting dangers long before the army reached them. Twice he'd steered them away from unstable ice bridges. Once he'd warned of an avalanche path. He was more than a guardian. He was an extension of her will, her power made manifest. As the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of purple and gold, Delilah called for camp. Within an hour, her army had established a secure perimeter, fires burning in sheltered spots, tents erected against the wind. The organization was impressive, a testament to the training they'd undergone over the past years. Delilah's command tent was simple but functional. Maps covered a folding table. Her 3 commanders gathered around it as she entered. "We're making good time," Tobias reported, marking their position on the map. "We'll reach the border by tomorrow evening, the capital the morning after." "Which brings us to the real question," Rowan said, his scarred face serious. "The Iron Crown Keep has walls 40 feet high, 1,000 royal guards, and Lord Thornfield's private army of 10,000 warriors stationed throughout the city. How exactly do we get inside without starting a war we can't win?" Mira, the young healer, looked worried. "They could close the gates the moment they see us, trap us outside." Delilah smiled, a cold expression that made her look nothing like the common healer she'd once been. "We don't attack. We're invited guests. Carl commanded my presence, remember. We'll walk through the front gates." Tobias stared at her. "You can't be serious. It's obviously a trap. He'll kill you the moment you set foot in that city." "He won't," Delilah said with absolute certainty. "Not publicly. Not during his grand 5th reign anniversary celebration, with every noble house in the realm watching. His pride won't allow it." She traced a finger along the map, marking the route to the Great Hall. "Carl wants to parade his power. He wants the entire kingdom to see that he's moved on, that he's thrived, that rejecting me was the right choice. He thinks I'm some broken exile coming to beg for scraps. He'll let me in because humiliating me in front of everyone feeds his ego. And we'll use that arrogance against him?" Rowan finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Exactly." Delilah looked at each of her commanders. "The moment we're inside, surrounded by witnesses, Carl can't simply murder us without proof of wrongdoing. It would make him look weak, tyrannical. Everything he's built his reputation on would crumble. We'll have the protection of wolf law and public scrutiny." "And if he tries anyway?" Mira asked quietly. Delilah's eyes flashed silver white. "Then he'll learn exactly what a white lichen can do." Before they could discuss further, Mira suddenly straightened. "That reminds me. I found something in the ruins yesterday before we left. I was going to wait, but..." She reached into her satchel and pulled out an ancient scroll, the parchment yellowed with age but remarkably preserved. "I think you need to see this." She unrolled it carefully on the table. The text was written in Old Tongue, the language of the first Pax, but Mira had clearly studied it. She began to read aloud, translating as she went. "When the last white lichen walks again in the kingdom of false kings, the stolen throne shall crumble. The traitor bloodline shall end, and the moon goddess will restore her chosen." The tent went silent. "It's a prophecy," Mira continued, her voice shaking slightly. "From the time of the Great Purge, 300 years ago, when King Aldrich Ereskon led the genocide against the White Lycan bloodline." Delilah felt something cold settle in her chest. "Tell me about the Purge." Mira glanced at Rowan, who nodded for her to continue. "The Silverblood dynasty ruled all the wolf kingdoms for over 1,000 years. They were blessed by the moon goddess with extraordinary power. White Lycans could command any wolf through alpha dominance. They could heal mortal wounds. They were 3 times the size of normal wolves and nearly impossible to kill. They were meant to be the guardians of all wolf kind. But power breeds envy," Rowan added grimly. "The noble houses, the ambitious families who wanted to rule their own territories, they feared the Silverbloods, so they formed a secret alliance." "Led by King Aldrich Ereskon," Mira said. "He was a distant cousin to the Silverblood line, far enough removed that his Lycan blood was almost non-existent. He convinced the other noble houses that the White Lycans were too powerful, that they suppressed the ambitions of worthy leaders. He framed it as liberation." "It was genocide," Delilah whispered. "Yes." Mira's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "They hunted every Silverblood they could find, men, women, children. They killed them all and burned the bodies. King Aldrich took the throne and established the Ereskon dynasty. The other noble houses divided up the territories. They rewrote the histories, destroyed most records of the Silverbloods, and built their kingdoms on the graves of the people they'd murdered." Delilah's hands clenched into fists. She'd known she was the last, but hearing the full scope of the betrayal, understanding that Carl's entire family legacy was built on the genocide of her people, it ignited something deep inside her. "They built their kingdoms on the graves of my people," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "That prophecy is known," Rowan said. "Not widely, but the old texts mention it. Every noble house with a decent library has a copy. When you reveal yourself tomorrow, when they see your silver-white eyes and Fenrir at your side, they'll know exactly what you are, and they'll be terrified." "Good," Delilah said. "They should be." The meeting concluded, and her commanders dispersed to their own tents. Delilah stood outside, staring at the stars, when a commotion at the camp's edge caught her attention. Shouts, the clash of steel, her wolves mobilizing for defense. She and Fenrir ran toward the disturbance. At the perimeter, a group of hostile rogue wolves had attacked, about 20 of them, lean and desperate, probably thinking this camp was easy prey. Delilah's warriors had already engaged them, but she raised her hand. "Stop!" Her alpha command froze everyone in place. Her own wolves immediately obeyed. The attackers, confused, paused. Delilah stepped forward into the space between the two groups. The rogue wolves saw her clearly now, a woman in white furs with eyes that burned silver. "You picked the wrong target," she said calmly. The rogue leader, a scarred male with wild eyes, snarled, "We don't fear exiles. Give us your supplies and we'll let you live." Delilah smiled. "I'll give you a better offer. Kneel or learn why you should fear me." The rogue leader lunged. He didn't reach her. Delilah's transformation was instantaneous. One moment she was human, the next she was a massive white wolf, 3 times his size, her fur glowing with ethereal light that turned the night into day. Her silver-white eyes blazed with divine power. The rogue froze mid-leap, crashing into the snow. Delilah released her alpha command, a wave of pure supernatural dominance that radiated from her like a shockwave. Every hostile wolf within 100 yards felt it, an irresistible compulsion that drove them to the ground. "Kneel," she commanded, and her voice in wolf form carried the weight of divine authority. They dropped, all of them. not just to their bellies but prostrate, paws over their heads, whimpering in submission. The rogue leader's defiance shattered completely. "I am Delilah of House Silverblood," she declared, her voice resonating across the camp. "Last heir of the White Lichen dynasty, chosen of the moon goddess, you attacked the wrong wolves tonight." She shifted back to human form, standing over the prostrate rogues. "You have two choices. Leave now and never speak of what you saw, or pledge loyalty to me and join the army marching to reclaim what was stolen." Rogue leader lifted his head, and there were tears in his eyes. "You're real. The last White Lichen. The prophecy is true. Yes, we pledge loyalty." The words came out in a rush. All of us. We're tired of running, of hiding, of barely surviving. If you're taking back the throne, we want to be part of it. By the time the excitement settled, Delilah's army had grown by 20 wolves, all of whom looked at her with something approaching worship. The demonstration had served its purpose. Her own wolves had seen the full extent of her power. Any doubts about following her into Carl's kingdom had evaporated. The next evening they reached the border. Ancient standing stones marked the boundary between the wastelands and the Iron Crown Kingdom. Carved with old runes, they'd once been part of a magical ward system designed to detect intruders and alert the capital. Delilah approached them carefully, Fenrir at her side. When she crossed the threshold, she expected alarms, alerts, some kind of magical response. Instead, the stones began to glow, not red for danger, silver-white for recognition. The runes carved into the stone shifted, rearranging themselves, responding to the Silverblood royal blood that hadn't crossed this border in 300 years. The ancient magic recognized what Carl's kingdom had forgotten. She was the rightful heir. She belonged here. Fenrir threw back his head and howled. The sound was supernatural, resonating across the kingdom, a call that every wolf within 100 miles would feel in their bones. It was the howl of a divine guardian announcing the return of the true bloodline. And across the Iron Crown Kingdom, wolves responded. In small villages, old wolves who remembered the stories from their grandparents wept. In towns, younger wolves looked confused, feeling something ancient stirring in their blood. In the capital, noble families went pale, recognizing the call from forbidden texts. And in the Iron Crown Keep, in his private chambers, Alpha King Carl Eriscon clutched his chest. He felt it through the broken mate bond, power, rage, and something ancient, something that made his diluted Silverblood ancestry scream in recognition. His personal healer, an elderly man named Thomas, who'd served Carl faithfully, examined him with growing concern. "Your Majesty, the bond sickness is accelerating. You're dying." Carl slumped in his chair, looking aged far beyond his 30 years. His skin had a gray tinge. His eyes were hollow. His once powerful frame had withered to something gaunt. "In wolf law," Thomas continued gently, "rejecting a fated mate without mutual acceptance creates a curse. The rejecter slowly loses their alpha power, their health, their sanity. Your bond with Delilah was blessed by the moon goddess herself. When you severed it, you violated a sacred covenant." "I did what was necessary," Carl said weakly, but there was no conviction in his voice. "For the kingdom, for power, for the alliance with Thornfield." "Was it worth it?" Thomas asked quietly. Before Carl could answer, the doors to his chamber burst open. Queen Evangeline swept in, beautiful and cold in a gown of crimson silk. She looked at her dying husband with the same affection one might show a business partner. "Are you ready for tomorrow's celebration, husband?" she asked, her tone brittle. "All the noble houses will be watching. You can't look weak." Carl didn't respond. Evangeline noticed Thomas and waved him away dismissively. When the healer left, she poured herself wine and regarded Carl with something approaching contempt. "I heard a rumor," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. They say your exiled mate survived the wastelands. Can you imagine? How pathetic would it be if she actually came to your celebration? Some broken, desperate woman begging for your attention? She laughed, a sound like breaking glass, completely unaware of the massive army camped just outside the capital city walls. Carl said nothing, but deep in his chest, through the damaged mate bond, he could feel something approaching, something powerful, something that terrified him. Outside the capital, in a camp hidden by the cover of darkness, Delilah stood before a basin of heated water. She bathed carefully, washing away the grime of travel. Her handmaidens, women from her army, helped her dress in white armor polished to a mirror shine, layered with furs as white as fresh snow. The crown of ice and silver was placed on her head. Ancient lichen symbols caught the firelight. She looked at herself in a polished shield serving as a mirror. 5 years ago, she'd been a broken girl thrown into the snow to die. Now she was a queen in everything but title, and tomorrow she would claim even that. Fenrir stood beside her, massive and magnificent, his presence a constant reminder of who and what she was. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we walk into the heart of the kingdom that tried to erase me. Tomorrow, Carl Ereskon faces the consequence of his choice." She looked toward the capital where lights glowed in preparation for celebration. In the grand hall, nobles were arriving, taking their places. Carl was ascending his throne, trying to look strong despite the sickness ravaging him. Lord Thornfield positioned his forces strategically. Queen Evangeline adjusted her crown. They were celebrating a king's reign. They didn't know they were about to witness his fall. They say pride comes before the fall. Alpha King Carl was about to learn that lesson in the most devastating way possible. Because when you reject a fated mate, blessed by the moon goddess herself, you don't just lose love, you lose everything. The great hall of the Iron Crown Keep had never looked more magnificent. Golden chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, each one holding hundreds of candles that cast warm light across the polished marble floors. Silk banners in crimson and gold draped from every column, displaying Carl's royal crest. Long tables groaned under the weight of elaborate feasts. Roasted meats, exotic fruits, wines from every corner of the realm. Musicians played in the gallery, their melodies bright and celebratory. Hundreds of wolves packed the hall, all dressed in their finest. Every noble house of importance had sent representatives. Every alpha who owed allegiance to the Iron Crown was present. This was the 5th reign anniversary, a celebration of Carl's rule and the prosperity his alliance with Lord Thornfield had supposedly brought. At the front, on the raised dais, 2 thrones commanded the room. Carl sat in the larger one, forcing himself to appear strong, despite the sickness eating him from the inside. He wore his full royal regalia, crimson robes trimmed with gold, the iron crown on his head, rings of office on his fingers. From a distance, he looked every inch the powerful king. Up close, you could see the gray tinge to his skin, the hollowness in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. Beside him, Queen Evangeline looked radiant in a gown of crimson and gold that matched the hall's decorations. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate style, a smaller crown glittering on her head. She sat with perfect posture, her expression one of smug satisfaction. This was her triumph, too. She'd secured her position as queen, displaced the common-born Luna, and stood at the center of the kingdom's power structure. To Carl's right, positioned prominently where everyone could see him, stood Lord Marcus Thornfield. The warlord wore his military dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest. His private army lined the walls, soldiers in matching armor standing at attention. It was meant to look ceremonial, but everyone understood the message. Thornfield's forces were the real power in this room. Carl's alliance with him wasn't just political, it was essential to his survival. The other noble houses occupied their designated positions throughout the hall. Lord Brennan Ashford, Master of the Eastern Territories, stood with his family. Lady Celeste Ravencroft, whose shipping empire controlled the coastal trade routes, held court in her section. Duke Harrison Blackstone, whose mines produced most of the kingdom's wealth, conversed with other nobles. They were all complicit in the current power structure, all benefiting from the alliances Carl had forged. Carl rose to give his speech, and the hall fell silent. 5 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the room despite his weakness, I made the choices necessary to secure this kingdom's future. Through wise alliances and strong leadership, we have built prosperity. Our territories have expanded. Our wealth has grown. Our enemies have been crushed. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Some questioned my decisions, Carl continued, and there was an edge to his voice now. Some doubted that I had the strength to do what was necessary. But look around you. Look at what we have built. Through wise choices and strong alliances, we've created a kingdom that will endure for generations. More applause. Evangeline smiled up at him, her expression one of calculated pride. Today, we celebrate not just my reign, but the future we have secured together. The massive oak doors exploded inward. The sound was deafening, like thunder cracking directly overhead. The doors didn't just open, they were blown off their hinges by a blast of Arctic wind that swept through the hall with supernatural force. Snow swirled into the room, impossible snow, because the day outside had been clear and bright. The temperature plummeted instantly. One moment the hall had been warm with body heat and candlelight. The next, breath became visible in the air. Frost spread across the marble floor in delicate branching patterns, creeping toward the dais like living ice. Every candle in the massive chandeliers flickered and dimmed, plunging the hall into dramatic shadows. The musicians' instruments went silent mid-note. Conversations died. Wine glasses hung suspended halfway to lips. Every eye in the room turned to the entrance. Through the swirling snow and dim light, a figure appeared. She walked slowly, deliberately, and even from a distance, her presence was overwhelming. White winter armor caught the faint light, polished to a mirror shine. A cloak of pure white fur billowed behind her, as if moved by its own wind. On her head sat a crown of ice and silver, ancient lichen symbols etched into the metal, catching the candlelight. But it was her eyes that truly captured attention. Even across the length of the great hall, they glowed silver white, burning with an inner light that was both beautiful and terrifying. She was not alone. Beside her walked a wolf that made the guards' trained warhounds look like puppies. The creature's shoulder reached the woman's waist. Its fur was pure white, luminescent, seeming to glow with ethereal light. This wasn't a normal wolf. This was something ancient, something divine, something that shouldn't exist. And behind them, visible through the open doorway, an army filled the courtyard. Hundreds of armored wolves in formation, all bearing a banner that made the oldest nobles in the room go pale with recognition. A silver wolf on a white field, the Silver Blood dynasty, a symbol that hadn't been seen in 300 years. The entire hall inhaled simultaneously, a collective gasp of shock and disbelief. "White lichen," someone whispered. "Impossible," another voice breathed. "The prophecy," an elderly noble choked out. "The prophecy is coming true." Delilah began walking forward, each step measured and powerful. Fenrir moved beside her, his massive paws silent on the marble despite his size. Behind her, Commander Rowan, Healer Mira, and Scout Tobias followed, their expressions grim and determined. The nobles parted instinctively, creating a pathway to the throne. No one wanted to be in her path. Some bowed their heads without thinking, ancient instincts recognizing royal blood when they saw it. Lord Thornfield's face went pale. His hand moved to his sword, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. Queen Evangeline rose from her throne, confusion written across her beautiful features. "What is this? Who dares to interrupt?" Her voice died as Delilah came closer, as she saw those silver-white eyes clearly. Recognition dawned. followed immediately by horror. The royal scholar, an ancient man named Aldrich who'd served the throne for 40 years, clutched the ancient texts he always carried. His lips moved in silent prayer or shock. "The silver blood heir," he whispered. "She lives. She actually lives." But it was Carl's reaction that silenced the entire room. The Alpha King sat frozen on his throne, staring as if seeing a ghost. His face had gone white as the snow still swirling in the entrance. Through the damaged mate bond, through the connection that had never fully severed despite his rejection, he felt her. Her power crashed over him like a tidal wave. Her rage burned through the bond like fire. Her certainty, her purpose, her absolute conviction, it was overwhelming. This wasn't the broken, weeping girl he'd cast out. This was something else entirely. Delilah reached the base of the dais and stopped. Fenrir positioned himself at her side, his silver-white eyes fixed on Carl with an intelligence that was distinctly unsettling. The three commanders stood behind her, forming a protective triangle. For a long moment, no one spoke. Silver-white eyes met faded amber. Queen and false king, rejected mate and rejector, ancient bloodline and usurper dynasty. "Delilah," Carl finally managed, and his voice was hoarse, disbelieving, barely audible. "Guards!" Evangeline shrieked, finding her voice. "What is the meaning of this? That exile should be dead. Remove her at once." The royal guards took a step forward, hands on their weapons, but then they felt it. The pressure of Delilah's presence, the weight of her alpha dominance. It pressed down on them like a physical force, making their wolves whimper in their minds. They stopped, uncertain, terrified. Delilah's voice cut through the tension, calm and clear, carrying a supernatural command that made every wolf in the room feel it in their bones. "I am not here illegally, Queen Evangeline. I was invited." She reached into her cloak and pulled out the crimson scroll, holding it high for all to see. Carl's seal was clearly visible. "Your king commanded my presence. I am simply obeying his royal decree." Her gaze shifted to Carl, and there was something predatory in her smile. "You do remember me, don't you, Carl? Your unworthy mate? The failure you cast into the cursed wastelands to die?" The hall was so silent you could hear the frost crackling as it spread across the floor. Delilah's voice rose, filling the massive space with power. "I am Delilah of the House of Silverblood, last heir of the White Lichen dynasty, chosen of the Moon Goddess. Herself." As she spoke, her eyes blazed brighter. Frost radiated from her in visible waves, spreading across the marble in intricate patterns. The air around her shimmered with power, and everyone in the room could feel it pressing against them. Fenrir threw back his head and howled. The sound was supernatural, resonating not just in the air but in the chest of every wolf present. It vibrated through their bones, called to their blood, demanded acknowledgement. This was the howl of a divine guardian, and it carried the weight of ancient authority. Every wolf in the room felt it. The compulsion to kneel, to submit, to acknowledge the superior power before them. Some of the younger nobles collapsed instantly, dropping to their knees without conscious thought. Others fought it, trembling with the effort, sweat beading on their foreheads as they struggled to remain standing. Only Carl remained on his throne, but his hands gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles were white. His face was ashen, his breathing labored. The royal scholar stumbled forward, his ancient texts clutched to his chest. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice shaking. "The texts, the ancient texts, they confirm it." He held up a yellowed page. "The silver-white eyes, the divine wolf guardian, the alpha command that compels submission. She is Silverblood. She is the prophesied heir. She is the last white lichen." A collective murmur swept through the hall. Some nobles looked terrified. Others looked awed. A few looked calculating, already wondering how to position themselves for what was coming. Delilah let the silence stretch for a moment, then continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. 300 years ago, your ancestor, King Aldrich Ereskon, led the Great Purge. He slaughtered my people, men, women, children, because our power threatened his stolen throne. The history lesson landed like bombs in the shocked silence. The white lichens were the original rulers blessed by the moon goddess to lead all wolf kind. We were meant to be guardians, protectors. But your bloodline craved power. You formed secret alliances with the other noble houses. You committed genocide and built your kingdom on our graves. Lord Ashford shifted uncomfortably. His family had been part of that ancient alliance. So had the Ravencrofts. So had half the noble houses in this room. And you, Carl Ereskon, Delilah said, her gaze boring into him, you rejected your fated mate, the last living heir of the bloodline your family destroyed, for a political alliance and gold. Carl tried to speak, but no words came out. You didn't just betray me, Delilah continued, her voice dropping to something more dangerous. You betrayed your own destiny. The moon goddess gave you a second chance to right your ancestors' wrongs. She gave you a mate who could have legitimized your claim to this throne, who could have united the bloodlines, who could have healed 300 years of injustice. And you spat on it. This is madness, Lord Thornfield's voice boomed across the hall. He stepped forward, his face red with anger. This is some witch's trick. She's using dark magic, illusions. Guards, seize her. Kill the beast. 20 of Thornfield's private soldiers rushed forward, weapons drawn, moving to surround Delilah. She didn't move, didn't even flinch. You really want to try? She asked, her voice almost amused. Fenrir growled, a sound that vibrated through the floor. Delilah raised one hand, and a wave of pure alpha power exploded from her. The soldiers were thrown backward as if hit by an invisible wall. They slammed into the stone walls with bone-jarring force, their weapons clattering from their hands. Frost spread up their blades the moment they hit the floor, ice crawling up the metal until the weapons were frozen solid. The remaining soldiers stopped dead in their tracks. Anyone else? Delilah asked calmly, looking around the room. Her silver-white eyes promised that the next attempt would be met with something far worse than simple force. No one moved. No one even breathed. I did not come here for violence, Delilah said, lowering her hand. I came here for truth, and truth has a way of destroying false kingdoms. She turned in a slow circle, making eye contact with as many nobles as she could. You want to know why Carl's kingdom is crumbling? Why rebellions rise? Why his alpha power fades? Because he rejected his fated mate. Because he broke a sacred bond blessed by the moon goddess herself. Because false kings built on betrayal always fall. Carl made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. But his rejection is the least of his crimes, Delilah continued, and her voice took on an edge that made everyone in the room tense. Before this celebration ends, you will all learn what your precious alliance is really built on. You will learn what Lord Thornfield did to secure his power, and you will learn why Queen Evangeline will never give Carl an heir. Carl's head snapped up, confusion mixing with the desperation in his eyes. Evangeline's face went white as snow. Her hand flew to her stomach in an unconscious, defensive gesture. Thornfield's jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle twitched in his cheek. "Guards," Delilah commanded, and her voice carried absolute authority. This time, when she spoke, Carl's own royal guards turned to her instead of their king. They couldn't help it. Their wolves recognized the superior alpha. They had no choice but to obey. "Bring forth the prisoner I left at your gates, the one with a very interesting story to tell." The doors opened. Two of Delilah's commanders dragged in a hooded figure, bound and struggling. When they threw the prisoner to their knees in the center of the hall and ripped off the hood, gasps echoed throughout the room. It was a woman in dark robes marked with witch symbols. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. Morgana Ashwell, a dark witch known throughout the kingdom, and she was looking directly at Lord Thornfield with an expression that promised she was about to tell secrets that would shatter everything. Every kingdom has secrets. Every throne is built on lies. But what happens when those lies are dragged into the light? When the architects of betrayal are forced to face their crimes? Carl's kingdom was about to discover that truth doesn't just hurt, it destroys. Morgana Ashwell knelt in the center of the great hall, her dark robes pooling around her, witch symbols embroidered in silver thread catching the dim candlelight. Her face was pale, drawn, her eyes darting between Lord Thornfield and the exits that were now blocked by Delilah's forces. Lord Thornfield had gone rigid the moment the hood came off. "No," he breathed, the word barely audible. His hand tightened on his sword hilt, but he made no move to draw it. Not yet. Delilah stepped forward, her silver-white eyes fixing on the trembling witch. "This is Morgana Ashwell," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "She is a dark witch who was hired 5 years ago to manipulate a king." The crowd murmured. Dark magic used against royalty was treason of the highest order. Delilah's eyes blazed brighter, and the temperature in the hall dropped another few degrees. "Under the authority of the white lichen bloodline, under the power granted to me by the moon goddess herself, I command you to speak only truth." The compulsion hit Morgana like a physical blow. She gasped, her body going rigid as the lichen command wrapped around her will like iron chains. White lichens had many powers, but one of the most feared was this: the ability to compel absolute truth from anyone of lesser blood. It was impossible to resist, impossible to lie under that command. "Tell them," Delilah said, her voice soft but carrying supernatural weight. "Tell them what you did." Morgana's lips moved, trying to form denials, but the words that came out were truth. 5 years ago, she choked out, tears streaming down her face, Lord Marcus Thornfield came to me. He paid me in blood gold, a fortune, more wealth than I'd seen in my entire life. Every eye in the hall turned to Thornfield, whose face had gone from red to deathly pale. "What did he hire you to do?" Delilah pressed. "He wanted King Carl to reject his mate," Morgana said, the words tumbling out now, unstoppable. "But the king loved her. The bond was strong, genuine, so Lord Thornfield ordered me to break him, to break the king's will." Carl made a sound, a strangled gasp. "How?" Delilah's voice was relentless. "I sent false visions," Morgana confessed, her voice shaking. "Night after night for 6 months I invaded his dreams. I used dark magic to plant images in his sleeping mind. I showed him his kingdom mocking him for having a common mate. I showed him rival kings laughing at his weakness, calling him soft for keeping a low-born Luna." Carl's hands went to his head, his face a mask of horror and realization. "I showed him rebellions," Morgana continued, unable to stop, his throne crumbling, his kingdom fracturing, his allies abandoning him, all because he kept you. Every night the same visions, growing stronger, more vivid, more real. "That's impossible," someone in the crowd whispered. "Dreams are just dreams." "Not when shaped by dark magic," Morgana said bitterly. "I planted seeds of doubt, of ambition, of paranoid fear. I twisted his love into uncertainty. I made him believe that rejecting Delilah was his own idea, born from necessity and strength. I made him think it was the only way to save his kingdom." "No," Carl whispered, staggering. He gripped the edge of his throne for support. "No, those visions, they felt so real. I thought they were warnings. I thought I was being shown the truth. I thought I was protecting—" "You were manipulated," Delilah said, her voice cutting through his denial. "But you still made the choice, Carl. The visions planted the seed, but you're the one who watered it." The noble houses were murmuring now, conversations breaking out across the hall. If the king had been manipulated by dark magic, what did that mean for the legitimacy of his reign? For the alliance with Thornfield? For every decision he'd made in the past 5 years? "Tell them about Lady Evangeline," Delilah commanded, and Morgana flinched. The witch's eyes found Lord Thornfield again, pleading silently for mercy, for him to somehow stop this. But the Lycan command was absolute. There was no escape. "Lord Thornfield paid me for a second service," Morgana said, and this time her voice broke. His daughter, Lady Evangeline, was to marry the king after the rejection, but Lord Thornfield didn't want her to produce an heir. The gasps that echoed through the hall were louder this time. Even Carl looked confused, his dying eyes fixing on Thornfield with dawning comprehension. "Explain," Delilah ordered. "He brought her to me when she was 16 years old," Morgana said, and now she was openly weeping. "I was ordered to curse her womb with moonbane poison. It's a permanent sterilization curse. Once administered, there's no reversal, no cure. She would never conceive." "No!" The scream came from Queen Evangeline. She rose from her throne, stumbling down the steps of the dais, her beautiful face contorted with anguish and rage. "Father, you did this to me?" Thornfield said nothing. His jaw clenched so tightly a vein pulsed in his temple. "Why?" Evangeline's voice cracked. "Why would you do that to your own daughter?" "Tell her," Delilah commanded the witch. Morgana's words came out in a rush. Lord Thornfield's plan was simple. Marry his barren daughter to the king. When Carl dies without an heir, either from bond sickness or natural causes, the Thornfield family would claim the Iron Crown throne through marriage rites. It was a coup designed to look like legitimate succession. Your father never intended for you to be a true queen, Lady Evangeline. You were meant to be a placeholder until he could seize power. The silence that followed was absolute. Evangeline stood frozen, her face white as the snow still swirling near the entrance. Her hands trembled. Her carefully constructed world, her identity as queen, her 5 years of marriage, all of it had been a lie, a manipulation. She'd been a pawn in her father's game. "You monster," she whispered, turning to face Thornfield. "You made me barren. You used me. You destroyed my chance at children, at a real marriage, at any kind of future beyond being your political tool." "I did it for our family," Thornfield roared, his composure finally breaking. "For power. The Arascons were weak. Carl was weak, sentimental, wasting his potential on a common nobody. I brought strength through our alliance. I brought wealth, an army, prosperity." "You brought treason," Delilah said, her voice cutting through his justifications like a blade. "You destroyed a sacred mate bond. You sterilized your own daughter. You manipulated an entire kingdom. You committed crimes against the moon goddess herself." Carl rose from his throne, and for the first time in years, genuine alpha power radiated from him. It was weak, flickering, the power of a dying wolf, but it was real. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of absolute authority. "Guards, seize Lord Marcus Thornfield. Seize his men. The alliance is broken." Chaos erupted. Thornfield's soldiers drew their weapons, forming a protective circle around their lord. But they were outnumbered and outmatched. Carl's loyal royal guards rushed forward, joined by Delilah's commanders and several wolves from her army who'd filtered into the hall. The fight was brief and brutal. Thornfield's men were skilled, but they were fighting on multiple fronts. Carl's guards in front, Delilah's forces behind, and the psychological weight of knowing they were defending a traitor. Within minutes, weapons clattered to the floor. Soldiers were subdued. The resistance collapsed. Thornfield himself tried to run for the exits, but Fenrir was faster. The massive white wolf cut off his escape route, growling low, and a wall of solid ice rose from the floor, blocking the doorway. 4 guards grabbed Thornfield, forcing him to his knees before the throne. His expensive uniform was torn, his proud bearing shattered. Evangeline approached him slowly, each step measured. When she stood before her father, the man who'd raised her, who'd groomed her for queenship, who'd destroyed her without her knowledge, she did something simple and devastating. She slapped him. The sound echoed through the silent hall. "I hate you," she said simply. Then she turned to Carl. "I didn't know. I swear by the moon goddess, I didn't know what he did. I wanted to be your queen. I wanted to give you heirs. I tried for 5 years, month after month, failure after failure. I thought something was wrong with me, that I was broken, but I never knew why." Carl looked at her, and his expression was complicated. Pity mixed with contempt, understanding mixed with resentment. "You still took my throne," he said, his voice cold. "You still stood beside me while my true mate suffered in the wastelands. You still smiled at her humiliation." "Because you rejected her," Evangeline shot back, her own anger flaring. "You chose this. You chose me. You made the decision to cast her out and marry me instead. A decision I was manipulated into making," Carl countered. "But a decision you still made," Delilah interjected quietly, and both of them turned to look at her. A figure stepped forward from the crowd. Carl's personal healer, an elderly man named Thomas who'd served the throne faithfully for decades. "Your Majesty, may I speak?" Carl nodded weakly. "The bond sickness you suffer from is directly caused by the rejection," Thomas said, his voice gentle but firm. "When you rejected your fated mate, you violated a sacred bond blessed by the moon goddess. Such violations carry severe consequences." He moved closer, his experienced eyes examining Carl's deteriorating condition. "Your alpha power diminishes day by day. Your health fails. Your vitality drains. But it's more than just you. An alpha's strength is tied to their pack's prosperity. By rejecting your mate and breaking your bond, you've been slowly poisoning not just yourself, but your entire realm for 5 years." Murmurs spread through the crowd. That explained the rebellions, the failing crops, the unrest. "Is there a cure?" Carl asked desperately. Thomas shook his head sadly. "Without reconciliation with your fated mate, without healing the bond, you will die within a year, and there is no other cure. No magic, no medicine, no ritual can save you. Only she can." Carl's gaze swung to Delilah, desperation naked in his dying eyes. "I'm dying because I rejected you?" he whispered. Delilah's response was cold, her silver-white eyes devoid of sympathy. "The moon goddess doesn't forgive those who spit on her blessings." The royal scholar, old Aldrich, stepped forward again, his ancient texts clutched to his chest. "If I may, there's more." He opened one of the books, his gnarled finger tracing lines of text. "The prophecy states, when the last white lichen returns, false kings will fall, and the true bloodline will reclaim the throne." He looked at Carl. "The prophecy speaks of you, Your Majesty, as a false king. Not because you were unlawfully crowned, but because you sit on a throne built from the genocide of the true rulers, the White Lichens. King Aldrich Ereskon, your ancestor, stole the Silverblood throne 3 centuries ago through betrayal and murder. Every Ereskon king since has ruled on borrowed power, on stolen authority." The scholar turned to Delilah, and there was reverence in his ancient eyes. "She is the rightful heir to the wolf kingdoms by blood and by divine right. The prophecy is coming true before our eyes. The false kingdom is crumbling. The last white lichen has returned." Carl staggered down from his throne. His legs barely held him. He stumbled, caught himself, and then fell to his knees before Delilah. The Alpha King, ruler of the Iron Crown Kingdom, knelt before the mate he'd rejected. "Delilah," he begged, and his voice broke. "Please, I was manipulated. I didn't know. The visions felt so real. I thought I was doing what was necessary. I thought I was protecting the kingdom." Tears streamed down his face. the first tears he'd shed in years. "Let me fix this. Let me reproclaim you as my Luna. We can perform the bonding ritual again. We can heal the bond. I can make you my queen. We can rule together, the way it was meant to be." "Carl, you can't," Evangeline protested from where she stood. "I'm your wife. I'm your queen." Carl didn't even look at her. His entire focus was on Delilah. "Please, I'm dying. The kingdom is dying. Only you can save it. Only you can save me. I'll do anything. Anything." The entire court watched, holding their breath. This was the moment of reconciliation they'd been building toward. The rejected mate finally getting her apology, her vindication, her crown. Delilah looked down at Carl, kneeling before her. She saw his tears, his desperation, his genuine regret. Through the damaged mate bond, she could feel his emotions: fear, love, hope, anguish, all tangled together. Quick flashes of memory assaulted her. His face when he rejected her, cold and disgusted. The guards dragging her away while the court watched. The freezing wastelands, nearly dying in the snow. The agony of her first transformation. 5 years of suffering, of survival, of becoming something new. "You want forgiveness?" she asked quietly. The hall was so silent you could hear hearts beating. "You want me to heal you? To save your kingdom? To pretend 5 years of suffering never happened?" She let the question hang in the air, stretching the moment until it was almost unbearable. Then she turned away from him, moving toward Fenrir. "Before I answer that," she said, her voice carrying across the hall, "there's one more truth this court needs to hear." The great white wolf lowered his head, and from a satchel secured to his back, Delilah retrieved a scroll. This one was older than the prophecy, the parchment nearly crumbling with age. "This is a genealogy record I found in the Silverblood ruins," she announced, holding it up. "It traces bloodlines, marriages, births, and deaths for over 1,000 years. It maps every royal family in the Wolf Kingdoms." She unrolled it carefully, and her eyes found Carl's. "It traces the Eriscon bloodline. And Carl, you're going to want to hear this." Carl's face, already pale from sickness, went absolutely white. A new dread filled his eyes, a terror that went beyond personal mortality. What could possibly be worse than what had already been revealed? What truth could be more devastating than manipulation, barren queens, and treason? Delilah's smile was cold and knowing. She held the scroll like a weapon, and every noble in the room leaned forward, desperate to hear what final revelation would bring this kingdom to its knees. They say every choice has a consequence. Carl chose power and lost everything. Now, as the last white lichen stands before a broken king and a shattered court, one final choice remains. But this time, the power belongs to her. Delilah unrolled the ancient genealogy scroll slowly, deliberately, letting the anticipation build. The parchment was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible, covered in names and bloodlines that traced back over 1,000 years. "This document was preserved in the Silverblood archives," she began, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "It traces every royal bloodline in the Wolf Kingdoms, births, deaths, marriages, betrayals, every connection mapped across centuries." She looked at Carl, whose face was a mask of dread. King Aldrich Eriscon, who led the Great Purge 300 years ago, wasn't just a usurper. She paused, letting the words settle. He was a Silverblood himself, a distant cousin to the main royal line. Gasps echoed through the hall. Even the nobles who thought they'd heard everything tonight were shocked. "He didn't lead the genocide out of fear," Delilah continued, her voice hardening. "He led it out of pure ambition. He murdered his own family, mothers, fathers, children, cousins, anyone with a stronger claim to the throne than his own, so he could seize power." The royal scholar stumbled forward, his ancient texts falling from his hands. The texts. They never mentioned. "We thought he was an outsider, not family." Your histories were rewritten, Delilah said. The truth was buried along with my people's bodies, but this scroll doesn't lie. Bloodlines don't lie. She turned back to Carl, which means, Carl Eriscon, you have silver blood in your veins, distant, diluted through centuries of political marriages, but there. You are descended from both the traitors and the betrayed. Carl's face went through a series of emotions: shock, confusion, horror, and finally, devastating understanding. You rejected your fated mate, Delilah said, her voice soft but cutting, not knowing she was the heir to the very bloodline you're descended from. The moon goddess gave you a chance to unite the families, to heal the ancient wound, to legitimize your claim to this throne through proper succession, and you spat on it. I have lichen blood? Carl whispered. Had, Delilah corrected coldly. Your family diluted it through generations of marriages for political gain. It's so weak now, it's meaningless. You're barely more than human in terms of your lichen heritage. But yes, Carl, you destroyed the one bond that could have restored your bloodline's legitimacy. The irony is almost poetic, isn't it? The weight of it crushed him. You could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, in the way the last bit of light left his eyes. He'd rejected his mate, violated a sacred bond, destroyed his health and kingdom, all while unknowingly severing his only connection to legitimate royal power. Delilah let the revelation sink in, then turned to address the entire court. Carl Eriscon, you asked me to forgive you, to heal you, to save your kingdom. Her voice rang with authority. Let me tell you what the past 5 years have been like for me. The hall was utterly silent. Even the torches seemed to stop flickering. I was thrown into frozen wastelands to die. I nearly did die. When my lichen power awakened, it felt like my body was being torn apart. I thought I was going mad, that the pain and the visions were punishment from the moon goddess for some unknown sin. She walked slowly across the hall, her white armor catching the candlelight. I spent the first winter alone, learning to hunt in a body I didn't understand, learning to survive in a place designed to kill, learning to shift when every transformation felt like dying and being reborn. Her voice cracked slightly. I built an army from nothing. Exiles, rogues, outcasts, wolves your kingdom threw away like garbage. Every day I wondered if your patrols would find me, if I would be killed, if I would survive long enough to discover what I truly was. She stopped, turning to face Carl directly. Do you know what kept me alive? Not revenge, not rage, though goddess knows I had enough of both. It was purpose. It was the knowledge that I was meant for something greater than being your Luna, greater than standing in your shadow, greater than the small life you would have allowed me. Her silver-white eyes blazed. The moon goddess didn't give me to you as a gift, Carl. She gave you to me as a test of your character, your wisdom, your worthiness to rule, and you failed. Carl's tears fell freely now, but Delilah felt nothing. No satisfaction, no joy, just cold, hard certainty. You have 2 choices now, she said, her voice final, and neither involves reconciliation. She raised one finger. Choice 1. I leave. I take my army and I walk away. I let your kingdom collapse under the weight of its own corruption. You will die from bond sickness within the year. Lord Thornfield will be executed for his crimes, but the damage is already done. Your kingdom will fracture, rival houses will fight over the scraps, and everything you built will turn to dust. She raised a second finger. Choice 2. You abdicate. You give me the Iron Crown throne, not as your Luna, not as your reconciled mate, but as the rightful white lichen heir. I will take your throne by right of ancient blood. I will restore order. I will heal these lands. I will rule as the moon goddess intended. But you, Carl Eriscon, will live the rest of your short life as a commoner, stripped of title and power, watching from a distance as the kingdom you sacrificed everything for thrives without you." The silence that followed was profound. Carl wept openly, something he hadn't done since childhood. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice broken. "I don't deserve to be saved." He looked up at her, and there was acceptance in his eyes. "But the kingdom, the people, they don't deserve to suffer for my sins. They're innocent in this." Slowly, painfully, Carl stood. His hands shook as he reached up and removed the iron crown from his head. For 5 years it had sat there, a symbol of power bought with betrayal. Now it felt heavy as sin. He descended from the throne, each step an effort, and walked across the hall to where Delilah stood. With trembling hands, he placed the crown at her feet. "I, Carl Ereskine, hereby abdicate the Iron Crown throne." His voice carried across the silent hall. "I name Delilah of House Silverblood as the rightful heir and true queen of the Wolf Kingdoms." He looked at her one last time. "I rejected you for power. Now I give you that power freely. I chose wrong. Let her choose right." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I accept whatever fate you deem appropriate. I owe you my life, my crown, and my kingdom." Carl's royal guards moved forward, and one by one they knelt, not to their king, to Delilah. Throughout the hall, nobles began to kneel, Lord Ashford first, recognizing the shift in power, then Lady Ravenscroft, then Duke Blackstone. One by one, every noble house in the kingdom bent the knee to the last white lichen. Delilah looked at the crown lying at her feet. The entire court waited, expecting her to pick it up, to accept the abdication, to take what was being offered. Instead, she said one word: no. The collective gasp was deafening. Carl looked up, confused. What? "The moon goddess doesn't anoint queens through abdication, Carl," Delilah said, her voice ringing with power. "She anoints them through right, through strength, through divine mandate." She stepped over the crown, walking past Carl toward the throne itself. "I don't want your crown given to me like a gift, like charity, like something I should be grateful to receive." Her eyes blazed silver white. "I claim the Iron Crown throne as conqueror, as the last white lichen, as the rightful heir of the Silverblood dynasty." She climbed the steps of the dais and approached the throne. It was dark iron, black as midnight, a symbol of the Ereskine dynasty's rule. She placed her hand on the cold metal. Ice spread from her touch. The transformation was beautiful and terrible. The black iron turned silver white, frost crawling across every surface, transforming the very structure of the throne. Ancient lichen symbols appeared in the metal, patterns that had been hidden for 300 years, now emerging as if they'd always been there, just waiting for the right hand to reveal them. The throne became what it had always been meant to be, a Silverblood throne. As if the moon goddess herself had been waiting for this moment, the full moon rose outside the great windows, flooding the hall with silver light. Delilah walked back down, picked up the iron crown that Carl had placed at her feet, and held it before her. As she channeled her power through it, the metal began to melt and reform in her hands. Iron became silver, dark became light, heavy became elegant. When the transformation finished, she held a crown of pure silver embedded with white moonstones, ancient lichen symbols etched into every surface. It was the crown of the Silverblood dynasty, reformed after 3 centuries of absence. Delilah placed it on her own head. Fenrir threw back his head and released a howl that shook the foundations of the keep. The sound was supernatural, divine, a declaration that echoed across the entire kingdom. And throughout the realm, wolves answered. Thousands of voices rising in acknowledgement. The true queen had claimed her throne. Moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating Delilah in ethereal silver radiance. Every wolf in the room felt it, a surge of power, of rightness, of the natural order being restored. The rightful ruler had come home. Delilah turned to address her kingdom, and her voice carried the weight of divine authority. Every kingdom that participated in the Great Purge will answer to me. Every house that benefited from the Silverblood genocide will pay restitution. Her gaze swept across the nobles. But I am not my ancestors' executioner. I am their restorer. She pointed to Lord Thornfield, still on his knees, guarded. Lord Marcus Thornfield, you are guilty of treason, manipulation of the crown, and conspiracy against the realm. You will be executed at dawn. Thornfield didn't protest. He knew his fate was sealed. Lady Evangeline, Delilah continued, and the former queen looked up with red-rimmed eyes. You were a pawn in your father's scheme. You will be exiled from the capital, but you will live. Perhaps in exile you will find the freedom your father never allowed you. Evangeline nodded, something like gratitude in her expression. Morgana Ashwell, you use dark magic against the crown. You will spend the rest of your days in the dungeons, where your power can harm no one. The witch bowed her head in acceptance. But to the innocent people of this kingdom, Delilah's voice softened, you have suffered under corruption you didn't create. I will heal these lands. I will restore justice. I will rule with wisdom, strength, and the blessing of the moon goddess. She looked at each noble house. Every wolf in this realm will now choose. Bend the knee to the last white lichen and help me rebuild what was broken, or leave these kingdoms forever. As one, every noble in the hall knelt and spoke in unison, Long live Queen Delilah! Long live the white lichen! Delilah turned finally to Carl, who still knelt at the base of the dais. What happens to me? He asked quietly. You will live as a commoner in a small village on the border, Delilah said, her voice neither cruel nor kind, simply factual. You will be stripped of title, power, and privilege. She descended the throne steps and approached him. But I will heal the bond enough to stop your death, not to reconcile. Never that. But because I will not have your death on my conscience. You will live, Carl. You will live long enough to see the kingdom you threw away flourish under true leadership. She placed her hand on his chest. Silver light glowed between them. The bond didn't restore. That was forever broken. But the death curse lifted. The bond sickness that had been killing him eased. Carl gasped as strength he hadn't felt in years returned to his body. But it wasn't alpha power. It wasn't royal authority. He was just a man now. Common. Ordinary. You rejected me to gain power, Delilah said softly. Now you will live powerless, watching from a distance as I wield everything you craved. That is more mercy than I deserve, Carl whispered. Guards, Delilah commanded. Escort former King Carl to his new home. As guards led him away, Carl looked back one final time at Delilah on the throne, crowned in silver and moonlight. She didn't look back. He was already part of the past. Delilah turned to her army, Commander Rowan, Healer Mira, Scout Tobias, and all the exiled wolves who'd followed her. You were cast out by a false king, she said, her voice warm with genuine affection. You survived when you should have died. You are exiles no more. You are now the royal guard of the Silverblood dynasty. You will help me rebuild this kingdom. As one, her army knelt. Long live Queen Delilah! Long live the white lichen! Outside, bells began to ring throughout the capital. The news spread like wildfire. The kingdom had a new ruler. The last white lichen had claimed her throne. 3 months later, the transformation was complete. The throne room gleamed with silver and white. The Silverblood banner flew over the capital. Trade routes that had been failing for years were restored. Rebellions that had plagued the kingdom ended as justice was finally served. Exiled wolves were integrated as honored citizens, their stories of survival becoming legendary. Queen Delilah ruled with wisdom and strength. She was fair but firm, powerful but just. The people didn't just respect her, they loved her. In a small village on the border, Carl lived in a modest cottage. He wore simple clothes, worked in the fields, lived as the commoners he'd once ruled lived. From his window, he could see the capital in the distance. He watched the kingdom prosper, heard the stories of Queen Delilah's just rule, felt the faint echo of the broken bond reminding him every day of what he'd thrown away. He placed his hand over his heart and closed his eyes. The bond was a ghost now, a phantom limb that would ache for the rest of his life. On the palace balcony, under the light of the full moon, Queen Delilah stood looking out over her kingdom. Fenrir sat beside her, massive and magnificent, her eternal guardian. "I was rejected by a king," she said softly to the night, "cast out, left to die. But I didn't die. I rose." Her silver-white eyes reflected the moonlight. "They thought they could erase me. They thought I was nothing. But I was always meant for this." She spread her arms, embracing the kingdom spread before her. "I am the last white lichen. I am the queen of the wolf kingdoms, and I am exactly where I was always meant to be." In the distance, a wolf howled. Then another. Then thousands across the kingdom, all acknowledging their queen. Delilah stood tall, crowned in silver and moonlight, Fenrir beside her, her kingdom prosperous and healing beneath her rule. The Alpha King traded his destiny for a crown, and the last white lichen took them both. But she didn't just take his throne. She reclaimed her birthright. She restored her bloodline. She became the queen she was always meant to be. Some wolves are broken by betrayal. Others are forged by it. Delilah Johnson was thrown away like trash. Queen Delilah of House Silverblood rose like a phoenix, and the kingdom would never be the same.
If this story of revenge, power, and the ultimate comeback moved you, you're not alone. Sometimes the wolves we think are broken are actually just being forged into something unstoppable. What's your take? Did Delilah make the right choice, walking away from reconciliation? Drop your thoughts below. Hit that like button and subscribe, lest you may not hear from me again. And if you loved this journey from exile to empress, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be. The end.